So guys, today I'm going to attempt to make a video here to show you how to fix the cracks in your instrument pod for Porsche 928. Very common thing, as you who are enthusiasts of the 928 know, is the dash and the pod cracks from being cooked in the sun over years, as these are aging cars. Now, I'll try to get to the point here pretty quick. But because my computer crashed and had to be reformatted, I lost my editing program. So I'm not going to be editing this, I'm just going to be starting and stopping the video. And okay, now I'll get to the point here. This one's in pretty rough shape. I'll try to show you the lighting where I'm at right now. It's winter, so my skylight isn't giving anything. Pretty good cracks. There's cracks all over it. Now, you spend a lot of money to get these fixed, or to be recovered, or to buy one that isn't damaged. So, as best as I can here, I'm going to show you how to fix it. And it's going to do a pretty good job. You'll see the end result at the end of the video. I'll try and give you a close-up view here of how bad the cracks are. Now, this is somebody did a really rough attempt at fixing this before, so there's a little bit of filling already in it. And a little bit of discoloring, but this is black, whether or not my camera is processing it properly, but trying to give you a close-up view of the cracks. And they are all over this one, quite a few cracks. So anyway, what you will need to do this job is, first of all, this stuff right here. Now, I don't know if you can read that. It is leather repair filler, and I got that, I can't remember exactly, 30 bucks or something for that little thing of it. And it's leathertouchupdye.com is the site that I got it from. Now, you probably can use other fillers, but I used this one, and they advertise it to be the best consistency out there, easiest to work with, so that's why I went with this one. And you will need this. This is Classic Coat black vinyl and leather paint. Now, this pod is black, so I'm going to be using this. Now, Classic Coat, made by SME, only comes in a limited amount of colors. I think beige, black, maybe red. But we know that a lot of the interiors are dark blue. So this is supplement for it. If you can't get Classic Coat, this is Color Coat. Now, this is a plastic and vinyl as well as carpet paint. It's made by the same company. I have a sneaking suspicion that it's just the same formula as the Classic Coat, but it's just relabeled. Anyway, this one comes in more colors. This is Shadow Blue, which is fairly close to the dark blue interior of 928s. Anyway, another thing you will need is some kind of small, easy to use, flexible plastic spatula of some sort. You could probably cut it out of the lid of a coffee can or something, but this is just one left over from a cheaper repair kit that I've been using for a while. And of course, you're going to need an arrangement of, or a selection of sandpaper. If you have 80 grit and 400 grit, that should be enough to do the job. Now, what I'm doing here first is with 80 grit, I'm just giving it a quick sand just to smooth out the lumps and bumps that are on it. Now, there is one small problem. The vinyl texture that comes from factory is going to smooth out and kind of disappear by doing this. But it's up to you whether or not you want to spend 400 bucks buying one, or having it leathered yourself, or buy somebody else, or do this yourself, have a slightly less of a quality, but still a massive improvement for those old 928s. Now, that's up to you, and again, you will see the result. I don't think you'll be disappointed. Now, I'm going to sand all this down a little bit, and I will pause the video. You don't need to watch me doing this. Okay, now that was just a quick sand, just to get the big gunk, blobs of gunk that were stuck on it from somebody else's very poor attempt at fixing it, or maybe it just came undone, his fix, or whatever. So anyway, I'm going to draw you a little picture here. Now I'm the furthest thing from an artist, so at least as far as drawing goes, so excuse the drawing. Now what I'm trying to show you here is this is the vinyl or leather, whatever it is, the top, the surface that is cracked. Now I'm just scribbled that in there to show the padding underneath. Now when it cracks, it pulls away and it kind of flares up like a little volcano effect. Now if you just fill over that and try to sand it, it's always going to be up and it's always going to be a ridge that'll show through. So what you're going to take is take a razor blade and you're going to cut on this angle. So basically you'll end up with this kind of effect afterwards, right? So then you can fill that in and you won't end up with a lip that's sticking up there. So other things you need is a razor blade. Nice sharp razor blade. A ruler would help, although you can do it freehand if you want to, but a ruler makes it a lot easier. I'm going to put it like this and I'm going to angle it like this. Now I'm going to cut that out simply by running it along here. You see that I'm keeping it not like that, but at that angle. Now I'm going to do that to this crack. Okay, so now I have taken the piece out. It's not perfectly straight, but that doesn't matter so much. The point is that it is going in like this instead of like that. Now I'm going to go and do the rest of these cracks right now, and I'm going to have to freehand them, some of them, because they're not straight, so obviously a ruler won't work. But do that to all the cracks. Some of them, like I did notice these cracks right here, feel completely flat. They're not flared up. So if they're not flared up at all, then you don't have to valley cut them like that. You can just leave them as are. Now I cut two of the cracks out, and also these ones here I'm again feeling are not flared out. So I'm not going to have to valley cut those ones. I will take a deeper sanding on it with the 80 grit just to make sure, and I'll do that right now. You do want to sand this a little bit where you've cut. And of course the ones that you didn't cut as well. I'm going to do that, get right back to you. I forgot to mention another thing you're going to need is this stuff. Now you don't have to use this stuff. You can just use like a 90% or higher rubbing alcohol or isopropanol to clean things up. But I've got this, so I'm going to use it. You need to clean the cracks out because you've just put dust and powder in it and you want the filler to stick. So mainly right now just concentrating on cleaning the cracks out. If you got an air compressor handy, you could blow it out. That would be even easier. For now I'm just doing it this way. Clean that up a little better and I'll get right back. Now the next part. I'm going to take our filler, dip our spatula in, and push it into the crack. It's pretty easy to do this part, but you would just want to make sure that you have actually pushed it into the crack. Turns out some of my filler's already gelled up in there, so I got to be careful. Now you can be kind of sloppy at first, it doesn't matter the first time. You're going to have to do this several times because when this stuff dries, it shrinks and it depresses into it a little bit, into the crack. So it's going to keep doing that until you sand it, refill it, and so on. Now unfortunately this stuff is not very fast drying, so you have to leave it overnight each time. So depending on how many times you have to do this, this is, you know, you're not putting a whole lot of time into it, but you have to wait. So you're looking at anywhere from a 3 to a, depending how much this stuff shrinks, 7-8 days maybe. With a little luck you'll get it done in 3 days. Okay, so you see what I've done here. I've pushed it into the cracks and then I've just scraped it off. Just like when you're doing drywall putty. Just like that. Try not to leave too much excess. You can even wipe that off with your finger because it just makes more sanding and more work later on. So scrape that off as best as you can, as level as you can, and it'll save you more work in between the applications of this stuff. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do that with all of them. Now I've got the putty in the cracks, but I really want to stress here that you want to remove as much of the excess as possible, because it will just make it such an annoying amount of extra work to sand this off afterwards if you don't remove the excess. Simply scrape it across. Don't do that way. Go lengthwise, obviously. Now there's a little depression in there, so I ended up doing that one, a dent of some sort. So just remove all the excess. And you can see this one, there's worse. I've seen far worse. This one does have quite a few cracks in it. So keep doing that and I'll get back to you. Alright, so I cleaned it up as best I can with this little spatula. Now as for the excess stuff that's far enough away from the crack, you can take a damp cloth and just wipe it off. But don't wipe over the cracks or you'll just be wiping it out of the crack again. Just a little bit of a wipe again to save you the extra work later on sanding it off or scraping it off if you end up having to. So there's just a few bits here and there that I don't like, that I don't want to have to sand later. Anyway, once you get it looking something like that, all the cracks are filled and you've cleaned up some of the excess. You can even use your finger just to smooth it out a little bit so that it's less sanding later on. But don't go over the crack. You've done that with a nice smooth flat edge, remember? Okay, so there we go. That's the first day's work done. It's been sanded a little and it's been filled and ready to dry. So that's going to have to dry overnight and then you come back to it the next day. There's no hurry. If you can only do this once a week because of your work schedule or something, it doesn't matter, but it does need at least one day in between or an overnight to dry, and it will shrink, so you're going to have to go over it again a few times. Okay, so this is 24 hours later and the filler has dried. As I mentioned, this stuff shrinks. Try and show you in the camera here. If you can see, it's pretty hard to focus in here in the camera, but if you see, there is still a valley because it shrinks. The filler shrinks. But this part and this day is not much work. Because I removed most of the stuff by hand with the spatula, I don't really have to worry about sanding it at this point. Simply, I am going to fill it again, the same way that I did before. Exactly the same way that I did before. Scraping as much of it as the excess off as I can. Now you get the picture. I just did the same thing with those cracks. I'm going to finish it and then let it dry for another 24 hours. I don't have to show you each time because it's the same thing. I'm going to fill it and clean up the excess, wipe a little bit of it with a damp cloth like I did before, and let it sit for another 24 hours or overnight. So anyway, you don't need to see me keep repeating this process over and over again. I'm just going to tell you, you keep repeating this process over and over again, giving overnight or 24 hours, longer if you need to, if you don't have time to get back to it right away, until it gets to the point that it stays level and no longer depresses or sinks back in as the stuff dries and shrinks. This, by the way, is a flexible filler. It's somewhat rubbery once it's dry, a little bit, but it's also at the same time sandable. Rubber normally just kind of balls up when you sand it, but this stuff doesn't. It actually is sandable. So anyway, I will start recording again once I'm ready for the next step. Like I said, this part is just a repetition for 2 or 3, anywhere up to 6 or 7 days until it stops shrinking and stays level and flat. Okay, so I've reached this point here. Now, the number of times I did the refill was 5 times. So that took 5 days. Now the last day, actually it was early this morning. I got up early enough and it's 10 o'clock at night right now. I did the last fill, which was the 5th fill. Now this time you'll see there's a little bit more excess. I kept removing it every time, but this time I left a little bit of excess, although it's very thin, because it will indefinitely continue shrinking and doing a little bit of a bowl every time you let it dry. So the last one, if you build it up actually a tiny little bit higher than the crack, then you can sand it down to be flat. Now this should be the final fill that I did, and it's dry now. And I'm going to sand it, and it will be ready for paint. And then when I paint it, that may be the final thing that I do. It may not. I will show you afterwards what I mean, because sometimes it looks perfect, but when you paint it, then you can see the unevenness sometimes. So if that happens, then you can actually fill over the paint and do it 1 or 2 more times if need be. But I'll get to that point if we have to cross that bridge. This may be the later on in the video, but this may be the last point of dealing with any filling. So anyway, use the 80 grit and a soft sanding block preferably, and just sand that flat. I mean, as simple as that. Now, you don't need to watch me do that entire thing. That's a waste of time in the video, so I'll get right back to you once I'm done it. Okay, so I did the first sanding with 80 grit. Okay, so going over this quickly. This was the 5th time that I filled. The last time I didn't clear up as much of the excess because I wanted it to somewhat hump, because it does shrink indefinitely no matter how many times you do it, and you'll always end up with a tiny little bit of a divot in the crack. So the last one, you want to go over the crack, still get this thinned out fairly good by hand, and then you sand it back to being level. Now next step would be 400, but I'm not quite finished filling yet. I don't know if you can see in the camera, but these little lighter spots are actually little divots where the sandpaper didn't touch. So I have to fill at least 1 more time here to fill in the divots. Now 5 days I'm at now, 5 or 6 days, 5 I think. It may seem like a really long time to do this. It takes time, but you're not actually putting a lot of time into work. So if you're patient or you have a spare pod that you can fix while you're still driving your 928, then whatever. But anyway, it's really not a lot of work, but it isn't for the impatient. Anyway, I'm gonna fill these little bits right now. I might as well let you watch that because it's not going to take long. Oops, sorry, I forgot one step. I'm back to this stuff again, and I need to clean out the cracks again. Now, these ones over here, they're good. They're ready to be painted. These big ones here still have some divots, and of course I got sanding dust in them, so now I'm cleaning it out. Another good thing about this stuff is it really evaporates super quick, so you don't have to spend a lot of time drying it off and whatever. So anyway, just these last little divots I'm going to fill, and it's probably likely that this will be the last fill before sanding and then painting. Hope so anyway. Now, I'm not a terribly patient person, so the only reason I'm doing this is for the video, and also because this is just a parts pod. It's not going in my car, so it doesn't really matter how long it takes for me to do it. Anyway, enough ramble. You can see what I'm doing. I'm just filling in those last little divots, and hopefully this is the last fill. Okay, so where I'm at now. I just finished sanding again with both 80 grit and then 400 grit. So I'm ready. I'm almost ready to paint it here. As I mentioned, I have the classic coat, leather and vinyl paint, and okay, I just want to let you know I did an 80 grit and a 400 grit. I didn't film that because you guys know how to sand. It's kind of pointless to keep recording over and over again, just sanding. So what I did is I took the knobs off. Now you can take the switches right out, but I just took the knobs off because I'm doing it the lazy way, and I'm going to cover that with a little bit of tape. The tape, as you probably realize, is just to mask off the little light bulb in there that illuminates the switches from behind, and you don't want to cover that with paint. So just use a little bit of a tape, anything. I'm using electrician tape. So they're taped off, and back to this stuff again. Again, you can use isopropyl, 90% alcohol, or even 70% wouldn't be too bad, but 90% dries and evaporates off much better. So just go ahead and give that a thorough clean. Okay, so I got it all cleaned up with the prep, and I'm ready to paint it. So, I'll show you that step. It's not hard. Okay, I've shaken the can for 1 minute as the instructions say. Now, one thing I'll let you know about this. This isn't the first one I've done, but I've done a few, and this stuff dries quickly when it sprays too far. So by the time it's gone 2 or 3 feet away from the can, the particles have dried and it's not going to stick to anything. So that makes it somewhat safe to use inside. At worst, you just have to wipe down what's behind you with a wet cloth, and it completely comes off. Now, I'm going to point out here, I have done a few of these so far, but never one this bad, and I know they do get worse. So I'm taking a guess at it that I'm going to be painting it and then see more flaws coming through. When I do that, well, keep watching the video and I'll show you how I deal with that. So the first coat with this stuff has to be just very lightly dusted on. It won't cover the filling yet. It's kind of priming it a little bit so that you bridge all the spots that don't stick very well. You do have to have ventilation, or at least be able to leave the room while it's drying and so on. Another thing I'll point out is I've used this stuff to change the color of vinyl parts as well before. So if you want to do it dark blue, red, any other color that it comes with, you can do that. And it is a pretty permanent change. It's not going to wipe off once you've done it. After the first coat, as the can says, 5 to 10 minutes. The first coat seeing it's lightly dusted, I like to give it in between and give it 8 minutes. Okay, so I waited 8 minutes. I got my fan on, exhaust fan, to pull some vapors out of here. Hopefully, actually I'll just turn it off so you don't have to listen to it for now. Okay, so the dusting is now dry. And I'm going to go a little bit thicker this time. Again, you want to keep your can shaken. I just kind of randomly shake it while I'm waiting. And put it on much thicker. You don't have to worry too much about runs. Do try and avoid that, of course. But it doesn't... I gotta scrape this piece of dirt off that got on it. It doesn't stay run. Like a little bit of run will actually kind of disappear by itself as it dries. This stuff is not terribly good at filling. So if you do need to fill any kind of scratches or anything, you're going to have to do a lot of coats. So that's why I go to the 400 when I sand it, so to do the final sanding. Okay, just going to go ahead and put it on a little bit thicker this time. It's not hard to spray at all. It's pretty easy. And you do kind of want to go over the whole thing, because just the repair spot, it would look slightly different shaded, sort of, although it is black. But it would still look a little bit shinier or flatter in areas if you didn't go over the entire thing. However, the spots that aren't cracked, you don't have to go over it with as much or as many coats. There's that point. Okay, so once I've put it on thicker like this, I give it 10 minutes to dry. So I'll set my timer for 10 minutes and come back. Okay, here comes coat number 3. Letting it dry for another 10 minutes. Okay, so as I suspected, The sanding isn't quite done perfectly yet, and you can still see the cracks and the filler through the paint. So the best way to fix that, as I've done before, is to make, now it's only the top that's actually so cracked up, so make it flat, like so, so that you can put a nice thick, really thick coat of paint on it without it running. As I said before, this paint doesn't have a very much of a fill capability. It doesn't fill very well, so I'm going to put one more coat on it, super thick, on the flat part, so it doesn't run. That actually has done a lot to cover the texture. However, when it dries, it's going to flatten out more and it's not going to be filled all that great. So with that extra thick coat, I'm going to let it dry overnight. And then I'm going to do some surface sanding when it's nice and dry, because now I can see the flaws like I mentioned I would be able to before. And then I'll continue on from there. Okay, another coat again, this time a little bit thicker. Okay, another coat. This time a nice thick filler one. I'm actually going to put a thick part right directly on the cracks that have been filled first. And then put a nice thick coat on it, on the whole thing. Now I am just doing the top section right now because that's the part that I had to sand and fill so much. This isn't like car paint. It's not like when you come to an end where it's already dried and stuff, it'll leave a foggy line. This stuff just doesn't do that. It blends in all by itself without any effort. So I laid that on super thick this time. I'm going to give it 20 minutes to dry before the next coat. Okay, we're getting closer. Still some more sanding to do though. This time very lightly. And when I get to this point, what I'm trying to do is sand the roughness smooth, but without actually going all the way through the paint to the filler. So if I show it poking through a little bit to the filler, then stop sanding and do another thick coat of paint to fill it. Okay, we're getting closer and closer to being done. Give it another quick wipe off. Keep it flat again. Okay, keeping it flat again. Now because I just sanded it, I'm going to give a light dusting. It did expose a tiny little bit of the filler, which I didn't want to do, but sometimes it's unavoidable. So light dusting, and then 8 minutes to dry. Okay, here goes another nice thick coat. Okay folks, I've jumped ahead here a little bit. First of all, quick sidetrack here. I'm going to show you a blue pod that I've done once before. Turned out very good, very smooth, very nice finish. And that was with using color coat because they actually don't make this one in classic coat. But it was the same thing, the same amount of effort and time into fixing this black one. Now, this is the first black one I've done. And as a good friend of mine warned me, black, when you're painting a car, shows every tiny little bit of flaw. Now, so it turns out, doing this black pod in leather paint is the same way. You can very subtly see the filler through, just a slight different texture on this pod. Now, I got a little bit sick of repetitively recording it, so what I did is I kept dusting on paint and with a lot of finesse, using fine paint, doing very, very, very delicate, using a lot of finesse, smoothing out the paint. Now, I don't have paper on here, I don't want to do it again. Using fine grit, of course. But what I've been doing over and over again to try and get rid of those last little ghosty images of the filler is dusting on the paint over and over again. Just like so. Building up. Now, if you go too thick at this point, it's not really going to be very effective because this paint it's not as potent or as toxic as a lacquer. I was trying to think of the name, but it still will dissolve and wet the paint, the already dried paint underneath it. So if you keep putting it on thick at this point, it's not going to be as effective. So anyway, so I'm just dusting it on over and over again, and I'm probably going to go ahead and use this entire can of paint to try and get it as good as it can get. So the video is almost finished here, and you'll see the end result. However, this I'm probably going to have to do a dozen times. It only takes a few seconds to do, but of course you got to have the drying in between. Now I'm letting it dry now at this point for 10 minutes each time, just to be sure. And okay, so I'll get back to you soon and show you the end result. Okay, so I've taken the pod outside on a snowy day, but at least it's light enough and bright enough out here to see the end result. It's not perfect, but as you can see, it's pretty darn good. Again, it takes away the actual vinyl texture, which is still remaining on the sides, whether or not you can see it in this camera. But the end result is pretty smooth. It's not perfect. I just checked online. Classic 9 Leather sells these recovered for the equivalent of $820. This fix cost me approximately $60. So again, it's not perfect, but it's definitely more than acceptable. Trying very hard to get the camera to adjust because of the snowy brightness out here. It's not clear, but I think you get the gist of it here. It's pretty close to perfect, just not quite. There's some better light angle, I think. Okay, so just some closing notes here. This being black, it took a lot longer than the lighter colors. I had to respray and lightly sand no less than at least 20 times for the final finishing part to get a decent finish on it. But anyway, that's how you do it. That's how I did it, and it only cost about $60 Canadian, as opposed to $820 to buy one recovered or refurbished. So the choice is yours. Put in some time to fix it cheaper. If your car is not going to be winning shows, or you don't care about that too much, then this is more than good enough. Thanks for watching. Spread it around to other people that need to fix their dash.